Yeah, so name is Cedric Thorbes, originally from Cleveland, Ohio, proud graduate of Glenville High School, and proud graduate of Morehouse College. And but I think all of that starts with my first encounter with the CTAG program. As a young person, growing up in the inner city of Cleveland as a middle schooler, didn't really have a real aspiration to go to college or really, what that next step in my life looked like. And I think the decisions that I made during that time, whether it was inside of school or outside of school, kind of reflected that. I don't necessarily think I was a terrible person or a terrible kid or, worse off than anybody else. I just think it was one of those situations where, I lacked vision. I lacked the goal. And so, I had a lot of idle time. And so when I got to high school, even leaving out of, middle school, I always find it funny when I, figure out how I ended up in the CTAG program. So I didn't know that, students got involved in the CTAG program because they were considered to be at risk at the time, right? And so when I initially met my linkage coordinator, it was a strange experience because I was actually in the process of getting in trouble in my high school. And he was an individual who swooped in probably like at the proper moment to come and save me. And I remember his words exactly to my principal at the time. And he said, if you give me the opportunity to work with this young man, he won't be a problem anymore. I remember that conversation like it was yesterday. And it turned out to be the truth. It took some time, but it actually turned out exactly the way he said. And so I just remember myself as being a lost kid and not really having a true sense of direction or what I wanted to do in my life. When I came into high school, I had all F's and an A, and my A was in gym. And it wasn't because of, like I said, a lack of intelligence or because I couldn't do the work. It was literally a lack of focus and a lack of accountability, right, on my part and, other educators within the space. And so going into my freshman year, I was trending along that same path, right? Not necessarily, I wouldn't say the grades were as bad, but I was, CD student when I definitely had the capability of having A's. And, I met my linkage coordinator, Mr. Golden, and Mr. Golden changed my life. He was really one of the first males in my life that was outside of my family. I didn't grow up with my father, but I had a very, strong uncle who was in my life and my grandfather who was always in my life. But as I got older, my uncle moved away, my grandfather was getting older, so it was like I kind of lacked that consistent male role model in my life at my teenage years. And Mr. Golden stepped in at the right time. He was really the first person to hold me accountable for the things that I was doing in class. He was the first person to start exposing me to things that was really like outside of what I saw every day going on in my neighborhood, right? Which was, I love Cleveland, but it was a lot of negative things that I saw growing up as a young person who lived on Buckeye, who took, the 10 bus across 93rd down to 105, to walk down St. Clair Avenue. My grandmother lived on Lakeview. So it was a lot of the things that I was seeing in those areas were not positive images of what young Black men could be. And Mr. Golden gave me the opportunity to see things outside of that. And the Closing the Achievement Gap gave me the opportunity to see things outside of that. And so, as a kid, you don't really understand all the inner workings behind like who's a part of what and what's going on and what individual people are pulling strings to make these things happen, right? So, when I can look back at it now, I can talk about, Senator C.J. Prentice. I could talk about Governor Ted Strickland and the commitment that they made to ensure that young people had these services. But at that time, I just knew it was a guy in my school who was getting me out of trouble, and I was gonna ride that train. And so from having the opportunity to be a part of CTAG and be a part of Closing the Achievement Gap, Mr. Golden started bringing a wealth of resources into the building, individuals from the community, people who, would show us how to properly tie a tie or properly eat at a dinner table, which fork to use, which knife to use, how to properly dress for an interview, talk in an interview, how to, even just cultural things, taking us to a museum, right? That was the first time I'd ever been to a museum. And, the first time I was able to wear a suit, right? All of those things came out of the BRIC program, and the idea of being a college educated man came out of the BRIC program. I mean, not the BRIC program, I'm sorry, the Closing Achievement Gap program. But I'm gonna give Mr. Roberts his shout out too for the BRIC program, which I feel is an extension of what, CTAG is. But when I think about those things, I think about all of the mentoring and training that I didn't even really know was happening at the time. They helped transform me into what I was. And so when I think about myself as a student before, joining CTAG, right? And like, as I said, I was a CD student. And every semester after I joined CTAG, my GPA got increasingly better. It got increasingly better. So I went from having a 1.9 to a 2.3 to a 2.7 to a 3.3, right? Then to by the time I graduated as a high school senior, I was ranked 11th in my class, I believe, and, graduated as class president and went off to Morehouse College. And so when I think about that, I know that wouldn't have been possible if it wasn't for my mentor, Mr. Golden, if it wasn't for people like Bob Ivory, if it wasn't for people like Mr. Roberts, who all took place in this CTAG program. I can name more, right? Mr. Simmons, just so many individuals who came in and, met me at a different point in time in my life and poured something into me as the man that I needed. And it wasn't just things about like going to school. It was things about being a husband, right? I didn't have a wife at the time, but now I'm in a space where I think about where I am today. And, CTAG was crazy that it was 15 years ago. I am still in contact with the same gentleman who I would ultimately say raised me while I was in school. And the same advice that I called to get from them as an adolescent, I still call to get from them now as a 30-year-old man. And their wisdom has gone far beyond my high school years. Their love and mentorship has gone far beyond, the job description. And these gentlemen still to this day hold me accountable to things that I need to do. And if I'm not doing them, they treat me as if I was their son, and they make sure that they get on me and make sure that I stay on top of that. So I'm grateful for the CTAG program and can definitely say that I wouldn't be where I am in my life if it wasn't for those gentlemen who stepped up, and who really, did things outside of themselves, took time away from their kids, their families. There were points in times I was eating at Mr. Golden's house and Mr. Roberts' house, and it was the weekend, right? They didn't have to be with me on the weekend. They didn't have any obligation to bring me around their families, introduce me to their loved ones, and really treat me as their own. But it was things that they did. And it was things that I feel because of the CTAG program, it brought like-minded men together in the city of Cleveland to do something for individual young men or like-minded young men who wanted to see something better for themselves. And I think it really made a large impact on not just myself, but a lot of the individual young men who came through the CTAG program, especially in that first year, the 2007, 2008 year.